About an hour.
About an hour. There's going to be some sections of the presentation where you're going to want to ask, well, what about this, what about that? We're hoping that everyone can just hold their questions until the end or until she's done. But most of the questions are probably going to start to pop up towards the end. Anyway, so.
In any part in regards to registration or status cards, that can be directed to Omar or myself after for the registration agents.
Yes. And she's not an expert in
On membership, yeah. That's right. Oh, and I will be here afterwards if so we can do questions after too.
And then also,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, and thank you for coming. And as Erin said, my name is Joan McEwen. I work with the Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. It's called CERNAC. I'll move away. It used to be what you probably know as INAC, and they've now called it Crown Indigenous Relations. I'm going to be talking about a bill that was passed last December, so it's almost 1 year old, called S3. And S3 expanded the scope for registration. So it will allow some people that had previously been not given status to reapply and potentially gain status. So, and I'll go through a little bit about that in the presentation. So the reason S3 came into play was because there was a court case called the Deschanel case, and in it this man filed a case against the government because he was denied status based on the fact that he had attained status from his mother instead of his father, and as a result, he couldn't pass status on to his children. So he said that there was a sex-based inequity in the Indian Act, which there is and was, and so he challenged the government and he won. So as a result of that, the government introduced S3 in the House to pass and to make changes and to fix the Indian Act. But just as a general history brief overview, the Indian Act came around in 1869. It is definitely a piece of colonialist legislation. It is racist and it is sexist. You can't deny that. It was the first time Indian was defined, so that's how we got the Indian Act. In 1951, there was a major edition of the Indian Act, and it was in that 51 Act that the government created the Indian Registrar. She's a woman, right now she's a woman, who lives in Ottawa, and she is responsible for putting your name on or off the Indian registration lists. It also brought and centralized the registration of Indians onto those lists into Ottawa. The 51 Act also allowed women who were non-Native, who married Native men, to gain status. It was also the same act that saw Native women who married non-Native men to lose status. That was 1951. That was challenged, and in 1985, Bill C-31 went through, and it reinstated women who had married non-Native men and returned status to them. It did not, though, take away status from non-Native women who had married Native men. They kept their status. These 31 also abolished enfranchisement, but it created the sections of the Indian Act 6.1 and 6.2. So that, you will see, comes into play a little later. And it also created second-generation cutoff. At the same time, it allowed First Nations to take control over their registration through Section 10 of the Indian Act. So there are some First Nations in Canada that control their own band lists and membership. The registrar does not. The Section 11 bands, of which Pic River is a Section 11 band, that list is controlled by the registrar in Ottawa. Because of C31 and the changes that allowed people to become registered as status again, 174,000 people were registered. So C31 passed in 1985, and then in 2011, a woman out in BC, Sharon MacGyver, there were other challenges as well, but hers came first, challenged the federal government and said C31 didn't go far enough because she couldn't pass on her status to her child. Her mother had been reinstated because her mother had married pre-51, lost status, and then she regained it under C31, and then so Sharon gained status, but she was a 6'2" because her mother had married a non-native, and she couldn't pass that status on to her son, and so she challenged, and she won in court. And so the government passed C3, which gave an additional children, generations, of women who had married non-Indian to become entitled. But it also introduced the 1951 cutoff. The 51 cutoff is important because it goes back to that first act that created the lists. And 51, the government always goes from the date of a legislation being passed and then moves forward. It doesn't go backwards. So that 51 cutoff was, okay, from 51 on, that's when this will apply. C3 saw 37,000 people register who hadn't previously been entitled to status. And then we get to S3, which is the one that was passed last December, and that one was, essentially, he said, you didn't go far enough, and also the bias is still there. The sex bias is still there, and I cannot pass status on to my child because I gained my status through my mother, not my father. And so the government made the change, the court ordered the government to make the changes by, actually it was by, I think, February, and they got an extension. So December 22nd, it came into play. The government, the parliament looked at the legislation and they said to the government, no, you need to be broader than this. This isn't enough, just getting rid of these sex-based inequities. You need to do more. You need to remove the 51 cutoff. And the government said, the minister said, no, she didn't want to do that without consulting first, because there will be a big impact on some communities, and it will be a big impact on the Indian Act as a whole. As well, there's a move or a desire to see First Nations take control over registration. And so the government said, no, we have to delay these changes, so that's where we're at today, and we need to consult. And Parliament said, okay, we'll let you pause on removing the 51 cutoff for now, but we want you to report back to Parliament by June of 2019. So the minister has to go back to the Parliament with a report on how to remove the 51 cutoff and how to make changes to the Indian Act so that First Nations resume control over their own lists on deciding who is and who isn't a member of their community. So yeah, this was the decision, the Deschanel decision, and it essentially, he got his status from his mother, and so he couldn't pass it on to his child because his mother was reinstated in '85. She became a 6'2", so he was or 6'1", and he became a 6'2", and then he couldn't pass his status on. Had he got it from his father would never have lost status, so he would have been a 6'1". That's sort of basically what happened there. And so we're on to, so the changes were made to fix those issues specifically, and then now into the collaborative process. What they think is going to happen with Bill S3 is that there will probably be between 28,000 and 35,000 individuals across the country that will be entitled to be registered now that had previously been denied. That's based on sort of an educated guess. They looked at the census and they looked at various numbers, and they looked at how many people were registered under C31 and C3, and so that's what they came to. Knowing that there will be an increase in numbers, the government did make a commitment in both the 2016 and 2017 budgets to increase non-insured health benefits program and post-secondary education program. Those would be the two programs most affected by an increased number of status individuals. There will be some impact on reserve, but only if people return to communities, which may or may not happen. If you do apply under S3 and you are registered as Section 11, it's controlled by the registrar in Ottawa. If you belong to a Section 10 First Nation, you have to apply to your First Nation. And forms are available online, and I think Aaron and you will work through get them to help you. I think would probably be the best advice. The delayed amendment, and that's the removal of the 51 cutoff. This is a big issue, and it will significantly affect people who were moved off away from the communities around 1951. So you will see some people that have been estranged from the communities for quite a while who are now eligible to apply and become part of the community again. So essentially, it affects those who were born or adopted before or after September 4th, 51, and whether they're entitled to be registered where they've had a grandmother who lost her status due to marriage to a non-Indian, and one of their parents were then entitled to be registered under 6.2. So it's all, the colleague of mine refers to it as Indian algebra, all the different coding, and it is very complicated. It's not straightforward or easy. Removing the 51 cutoff will extend entitlement of Indian status under 6.1 to women and her descendants that were removed from banned lists. So, as I said, it will change your community membership lists. This is one of the items that the government wants input on. So, mostly around timing, how you see this happening, what impacts, good or bad, do you see for your community, and what you think or would like the government to do about the registration issue and the 51 cutoff. There are numbers for the S3, the Deschanel decision, the 27,000. They don't have any numbers around the 51 cutoff. Using 2016 census data, there are 750,000 to 1.3 million people who self-report Indigenous ancestry. That doesn't necessarily mean they would be eligible for status, though. Again, this will impact communities, especially because many of these people would have been moved away from the communities, moved away from community and disconnected from the community. The Parliamentary Budget Officer in Ottawa estimates there will be about 270,000 people who will be entitled to be registered once they take away the 51 cutoff. So that's a significant increase in the number of status in Canada. Right now it's just about 980,000 about. So adding 270,000 is a significant increase. This is the process we're involved in, all of us here. We're sort of the pink session, the community session. When the legislation was passed, the minister appointed a special representative. Her name is Claudette Dumont-Smith. She's from Kitigan-Zibi near Maniwaki in Quebec, near Ottawa. So she has been and will continue to be going around the country holding sessions in each of the provinces and territories, meeting with chiefs and council and membership clerks. She's also meeting with expert panel has been set up. That includes representatives from the Indigenous Bar Association, as well as academics on Indigenous issues. So, there was also there were information sessions, and then there was also consultation approach announced, and that's what Aaron applied for funds to hold these kinds of events. So that's happening across the country in different communities and with different organizations to have meetings about what to do about changing the Indian Act. So that's sort of where we're at. These regional events with the Minister's Special Representative, the MSR, there will be one in Toronto in January 23rd, 24th, I think. One in Ottawa, that's the same week, but at the end of the week. And one in Thunder Bay in March. And these will be events that will be held, and she will hear from community members, chiefs, and council about what to do next. And then she will be writing a report between March and June, and that report will be tabled in Parliament in June. It is a hard date. That report needs to be handed in. The minister can't say, sorry, I didn't get it done. We didn't have time. So that's the process. So these were the streams that the government is looking for input from communities on. Implementation of the removal of the 51 cutoff. How to best implement changes to ensure that there's enough resources and that any unintended consequences are mitigated, which means that, we don't want to make a mistake again. It seems every time they make changes to the Indian Act, it causes another issue, and that's where we're at today. I know, yeah. Shocking, isn't it? There's also some other inequities in registration that are a problem. As far as membership and registration goes, adoption issues, that has come up quite a lot, be it legal or custom adoption, and passing on membership and status. Second generation cutoff, where you have a grandparent and a parent who, one are non-status, you were cut off and said, no, you don't get status. Unknown unstated paternity is an issue as well. And the government has made a commitment to be more open and accepting of information from an individual who's applying, who has that on their birth certificate. Enfranchisement, deregistration, children of same sex, categories in Indian registration, that's those 61A, 6B, 6C. The numbers will change or have changed under the S3 legislation as well. And then the third one, which is probably the biggest one, I think the one that most people would be interested in, is First Nations gaining control and exclusive control responsibility for determining membership and citizenship of their communities and moving beyond the Indian Act. So that would be the community taking on the responsibility for their membership lists and their band lists and citizenship. And I understand there are some talks underway about moving Pick River from a Section 10. And so those kinds of membership code and having, a code established so that you can maintain your own list. That's the big question there. So those are the three main areas that the consultation is underway and concerned with. Do you want to go? We don't need to go into questions in detail, or do you want to? No, but these questions, like these are all broken down, right?
Yeah.
I don't. So for the 51 cutoff, some of the questions would be, how will it impact you and your community, your organization or group? How will it be addressed? Like, it could impact housing, cultural integration, especially for those individuals that were removed from the community and have been away from the community for a while. Programs that are offered on reserve. How can the Government of Canada assist in addressing the impacts of the removal? That includes capacity and resources, timeline, and how soon would you want to see the 51 cutoff implemented? So as soon as June, when she tables her report, or a year from now, or once you have your membership code in place, or these are all big questions and big issues. They're not simple. There's no check, this is the answer. Things you have to think about. Stream 2, these are the other issues and so a lot of you may have some personal experience in relation to some of these issues, and so the government is looking for what you would recommend as next steps. And then the third one is, again, this is the big one about the community taking on responsibility for membership lists. So, should the community take on responsibility? Why or why not? What are the issues or concerns that you may have? And when would you like to begin taking it on, and what do you recommend as the next step going forward? Each community is different. For example, Mohawk community, you need both parents to be Mohawk to be Mohawk. You're not a member of the community if you have a parent that's not Mohawk. There's another example out in Alberta of a community that it's on oil, sitting on oil, and so it actually reduced its membership list because it didn't want so many members. So these are issues and concerns and things you have to think about. So next steps. So these are the community consultations that are ongoing. They started more or less in October. They'll run until March, end of March. There are the regional events happening across the country. There are expert panel discussions I mentioned with the Indigenous Bar Association and various academics. There will be one in Sudbury, and I think it's in January, but I'm not exactly sure of the exact date. There is, and this is something that each and every person in this room could do, is there will be an online survey available in mid-December. There will also be some paper copies, and it might be something this community wants to sit together and go through. I haven't seen the survey myself, so I don't know what kind of questions they're asking, but there will be that survey available. And then, as I mentioned, that report to Parliament in June. Here's some contact information. This email account is being, there are two young women I work with are reading all those emails and responding, so if you have questions or concerns, you can definitely direct them to that email address. Toll-free number, fax, mail-in information, and of course there's lots of information available online on the Government of Canada website. Not the easiest website to follow, but if you type in this address, you'll get directly to the site with the issues. So you'll see papers on the collaborative process, on some of the fact sheets, a lot of the information I think Erin has printed out that you can get. I don't know if we want to go through these. These are really how they came to the decision around the S3. How the judge came to the conclusion that there was definitely a sex-based inequity in the Act, even after the MacGyver decision. So, just quickly, this was Stéphane Deschenaux, his mother. Actually, this was his grandmother, I guess, married a non-Indian, lost status. The child wasn't eligible for status until 1985, and then they were registered as a 6'2", and if they had any, and she married a non-Indian, so Stéphane was a 6'2". He couldn't pass on his status to his children. However, had he gotten his status from his father had married a non-native, she would have gained status right before 1985. The son would have been a 6'1", child would have been a 6'1", they would have passed on the status. So the judge took a look at this, she did the comparison chart, and she said, okay, we're going to make this line equal. And so that's what's happened. So now the great-grandchild is section 6'1" or 6'2", depending on who the parent is here. And that was called the cousins issue. The siblings issue has to do with a woman that lived in the same community as Stéphane. Her issue was her child born, she was a child born out of wedlock. So her father, unwed to a non-native woman, but who was her mother, she became 6'2". And then had she been male, she would have been a 6'1". So again, the gender difference. And so then the court reinstated that and made this line equal, regardless of whether you gained your status through your mother or your father. And the third, this is S3 again. This is a small impact, but it's significant. This has to do with children between 1951 and 1985. If children of a Native mother and a Native father, so full status, but if the mother divorced and remarried and married a non-Native, she lost status. And if she presumably took her children with her, they lost status as well. And so under C31, she would have gotten reinstated as a 6'1", and then the children, though, would have been 6'2". So now, again, a comparator with the male version, had this been male, the status would have been 6'1" all the way down. So that's the S3 repairs that. So there may be some cases where you can apply now and get status, or get your 6'1", 6B, 6'2" changed. So so those were the three main things that were covered by S3, the legislation passed last December. And I think that's it. We won't get into those. Oh, this is the 51 cutoff. So this is what the 51 cutoff means. So this is the current situation. If you're born before 51, or adopted before 51, and your Indian grandmother, married non-Native, lost status, regained it under C31, 1985, became a 6'2", 6'2" parent. The child is a 6'2". They married a non-Native. The 51 cutoff comes into play, and they are not eligible for status. So the plan is to change it so that the grandchild now, the status is reinstituted. So those are this is the main things, and why there's potential changes to the number of people eligible to be registered under the Indian Act. So, and that's about it. And I bet you there are lots of people have questions that are personal questions. As I'm not a membership expert at all, so I don't, but I do know that if you want, you can give me your name and phone number, and I can pass it on to there is a group of people working on registration specifically to do with the S3 legislation, and they're based in Winnipeg, and they are fairly efficient at getting through the paperwork and returning phone calls. So that's the presentation. Yeah.
So will it speed up the gender equity applications, because we've been waiting since 2014?
You apply that would be under the C3, the provider. In theory, it should. You haven't heard since 2014? Really? And like no contact? Yeah. Okay. Well, if you give me your name and phone number, I will try and get somebody to give you a call back on that, because I thought they were through most of the MacGyver applications. Okay, so it's related to adoption?
Every single paper that they need, they got the proper forms, the adoption forms.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, adoption, again, that's one of those issues that were on that list of questions and issues. Mm-hmm. Hope, yeah, we can hope, yeah. That I don't know. I think it would depend on how big how many people are applying. Because it is very much an individual application process, right? Yes, and that's this group in Winnipeg has been set up to deal with all these applications.
From a community perspective, what would be our role in the whole process, and what from an administrative point, support would we receive, and making sure that we're administering it and not taxing on the resources that we have right now.
Yeah.
That is established in it.
As far as supporting the membership clerk?
So for Aaron and again, like, what's been done to make sure that we can be overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple of things. There has been some training, and there's some upcoming training on this that's been the regional office out of Toronto? Thunder Bay. Okay. They've been doing some training on that, so that hopefully will help. As far as resources, the long-term goal, because there will, in theory, be an increase in the population here, or at least in your membership lists, and so the increase in funding for different programs hopefully will come into play and help alleviate some of that.
But for the initial process, right? So both Aaron and has other job responsibilities. Assuming that we would have a high number or a higher demand on their time, is there going to be compensation coming for their salary so that we might have to back with
Yeah.
why that is.
And that I don't know. That I don't know. I think it's mostly funded as a part-time position right now.
We're part-time membership clerks, but full-time employees.
Yeah, yeah.
But our projected increase in population was like
57 in total.
Our projected increase in population based on the
S3, yeah.
would be, I think it was middle like 7 or some are basically 57. And I don't know what it was based on. When I went away to August for the kind of beginning stage of this, it was but it didn't really say it had a specific chart, and it had us by number, 192, and it was like 57 people for Finney River, or BC long. But it didn't say where they based on, so I don't know if it was based on past application, rejected application, or things like that, and we looked at that stuff, I can ask, until we go.
It,
I wasn't asked that with how the implementation, so they provide you
A baseline, yeah,
yeah.
there have, that sounds low, and like, how do we know? How many children are there, right? So it would be interesting to find out how it happens.
And then, of course, to be connected back to one, we have to provide like aliens, right?
It would have been based on, there was a demographer, or statistician that did a research paper for the government, Stuart Cadworthy, and so he did his analysis based on the C31 increases, the C3 increases, and then it was a projected educated guess for the S3. But that number is just for the S3, it's not for the 51 cutoff. So that's just based on the three things, the cousins, sibling, and omitted minors issues. So it's not based on removing the 51 cutoff, which will be a bigger number, right?
So from our side, if we were to, I would see that would be probably one of our biggest challenges, making sure that we did administer it properly. So, at what point would you see that come to you guys to say, you have to put some dollars attached to this process? What stage? We just put it on a survey, we can do the letters and things like that, but I think, where would you see the best place to table that as a common, I think it's gonna be a common goal and health conversation. Where would be the best resource or location to table that to make sure that that's not a problem?
Yeah. Well, certainly that's something that I'm feeding back in when because I hear this quite frequently, how underfunded the membership clerk is in almost all communities. And as well, it's something that Kim and Aaron can raise when they go to the training in Thunder Bay about the need for increased funding for these positions. So, yeah.
Again, me and Eric are available. We are going away next week to learn about some application processes and other stuff, so.
And we'll also be like doing, more community sessions, especially like when the
Sure.
questionnaire, the survey is released, just to try and gain more information, and also, probably break down into like the smaller focus groups like we did previously with, your application processes, just so that there's that comfort that families feel together to be able to give their honest input as well. So, once we get that kind of, that's for the advertising info, and then we'll be reaching out to you directly to try and set those sessions up.
Yep.
Sorry I'm late. I understand there were conditions of the park, and that you would come to the thing appropriately at a specific time. A question could have been asked, but you did not get the answer. Well, I didn't know. You told the girl, I'll take your name and we'll get back, and how long have you been waiting?
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, as an actress for quite some time, and we've always had terrible, terrible time of getting money. We talk about increase of money at three times. Housing example. We've been getting a lot of help by members. One is at our turn. One is at our turn. So we go and use all kind of schemes of putting up beautiful houses, you know. People are paying, you know, and some crazy schemes that have been created about. We have 800 acres of land on the reserve. One of the houses that my wife forced me to get appropriated 7 acres of land in my house. And if we build 60 homes, there goes a lot of our reserve land. You know? So I know that, and you'll come from the knock and they say, well, we gotta take that, because in my case, I own some of the road, I own some of the river, you know, and that thing, and I don't give a damn about it actually. But you stress time and again that there will be additional people coming on, whether it's this kind of seed tree or whatever. So there's what, 600 reserves approximately across Canada, you know. All of a sudden, they're all going to jump at that. They're going to say, well, now we put our money, because I know the new council that's going to be elected. Now we're waiting for money. Where's the money? Where's the money? Will that money come? When will it come? You know, and how will all this, look at all the people that listen to what this is going to be done. Well, that's going to be good. I'm glad I'm no longer on council. You know, I'm going to retire. But there is going to be trouble that's going to happen. You say we may have to go to Sudbury for another workshop. The girls are going somewhere else, you know. I would not want to leave her with me. Because this is going to be a problem, and I'll sit here and I'll come and argue about it then. I had questions I was going to ask, and I was told you can't ask questions later on. You have no time for questions. So is this going to work?
We can hope.
No, I'm going to hope too, and I'm sure everybody here is going to hope that now my child is not going to be able to get some more money, some house and all that. Not put more land on this reserve to put more houses.
And
Been after land bank for 35 years, and I'm still in another big pile of paper somewhere where bureaucrats are going to, well, we'll have to take care of this because this is going to create a problem. So, will you be back?
I can come back. If I'm invited back, I could come back. But I can tell you, yes, I agree, and I think addition to reserve or extensions of reserve are going to be a critical piece to this. I think that I think the biggest influx you'll see in the community population on reserve won't be necessarily those people that have been estranged from the 51 cutoff, but will be those ones in your community right now who don't have status for whatever, for one of the reasons that we saw in those other charts, and that will regain status, but they're already a part of your community. It's just that they don't have the 6-1 or 6-2 or whatever on their card. But you're right. I think resources are critical, and they're an important part of this. I think, too, that taking over control of membership and citizenship is something that the community might want to consider doing in order to be able to determine.
Reality, the dollars will
Yeah.
come. I know we've been very hard at getting the money,
Yes.
or some other scheme that we will try this. You know? So I don't know. I'm glad I shouldn't have came. I should have stayed home and watched it go hockey.
Yeah. Fine.
So,
I'm here.